Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing our season previews with the Texas Longhorns. Can they make the jump to a national championship winning team? Is Arch Manning the real deal? All of that will be answered in this video. But first, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and follow us on our social medias. The links to those will be in the description below. And now, let's look at the 2024 recap. 13-3 with a 7-1 conference record was how the Longhorns ended up last year. 2 of their 3 losses came to the SEC champion Georgia Bulldogs, and their third and final loss was to the eventual national championship winning Ohio State Buckeyes. Not the outcome you were hoping for if you're a Texas Longhorn fan or if you're on that roster or staff, but you can't be too mad at it. It was an amazing year altogether, arguably only a few plays away from winning both the SEC championship and a potential national championship. And statistically, they had one of the best defenses in the country last year, only behind Ohio State. But the offense honestly was what held them back last year, around 60th in terms of average yards per rush attempt and 40th in terms of yards per completion. Not terrible numbers, but very pedestrian if you're talking SEC championship or national championship caliber teams. If they can bump those numbers up this year, they should be a very, very dangerous team. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at Texas's schedule this year. And it is going to be a very interesting one, to say the least. They get both the reigning national champion and the reigning SEC champion on the road this year. They also get Florida on the road and the Cotton Bowl matchup versus Oklahoma, obviously at a neutral site. Their non-conference schedule is pretty easy, and other than the biggest names on their schedule, their toughest opponents could have been a lot worse. No Alabama, no LSU, no Ole Miss. They get Texas A&M, who is a very good team at home, as well as Vanderbilt and Arkansas, but that away slate is pretty gnarly. We want to emphasize that, especially if you count that Oklahoma game. Could be a lot better, but also could be a lot worse. And with that, let's take a look at this team's strengths for next season. Their first strength that we need to highlight in this video is going to be the defense. They have a ton of talent returning from last year's unit. They do lose a few key names, but of the guys returning, Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill Jr., Trey Moore, Michael Taffy, and Malik Muhammad. Some very, very great players returning. Those are the biggest of those names. And out of the portal, they add linebacker Brad Spence from Arkansas, who was an animal for them last year, as well as interior defensive lineman, probably the best interior defensive lineman in the portal, in Murad Watson from Syracuse. And that unit is not only extremely talented with those additions and with the returning producers, but it is extremely deep as well. We have no problem projecting them as potentially the top defense in the country, easily top 2, tied with Penn State maybe. But another strength on this team is going to be the depth at the skill positions. At running back, they returned Trey Wisner, who was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. They returned CJ Baxter, who was projected to be the starter last year before going out with injury. And they returned Jarrett Gibson, who got a healthy amount of touches in that backfield last year. And at wide receiver, it's much of the same. Ryan Wingo returns, DeAndre Moore returns. Those are the top 2 producers returning in that room. And they go out and add Stanford wide receiver Emmett Mosley to bolster that room. And what we thought could be a weakness coming into the spring is now a strength in our opinion. It's the tight end position. They have a lot of talent at that position, but not a lot of returning production until they go out and add Jack Injuries from Cal, who combined for over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2 seasons for the Golden Bears. Easily should be one of the best tight ends in the country if he's serving as the security blanket for our third strength for this team, Arch Manning. Now, we do understand that Arch Manning might be the most polarizing player in the sport right now, maybe behind Nico Iamaleava, but with the things we've been hearing out of spring, we are completely sold on him. We are buying the Arch Manning stock. We have been for the past year, and we already know he has exceptional arm talent, accuracy, strength, pocket awareness, pocket athleticism, but what we've been hearing out of camp is that he's an exceptional leader, has a competitive edge Texas hasn't seen in a while, and that just puts us over the edge in our opinion. That's the biggest plus you can hear for a guy like Arch Manning. And with that being said, let's take a look at this team's potential weaknesses this year. The biggest question mark on this team without a doubt is the offensive line. They're a very talented unit, but they lose a ton of production from last season, including both of their starting tackles, Kelvin Banks and Cameron Williams, center Jake Majors, and starting guard Hayden Aiden Connor, which is a testament to Sark and Co.'s ability to develop linemen, but a brutal reality to have to live with going into this year, especially with a first-year starter at quarterback. We think this unit could be good enough this year, but it will be hard to replicate the success they had last year. We do like Arch Manning's athleticism out of the pocket more than Quinn Ewers last year, so it could be a bit null and void if, like we said, the unit is good enough. He's going to be able to make plays outside of the pocket, which could lend to Texas's success better overall as an offense. But that offensive line is still easily a huge question mark going into this year. Not a lot of returning experience. And as for our second and last weakness on this team, it's going to be the special teams unit. As relatively disliked as Bert Auburn was for the Longhorns last year, he was able to provide this team with some stability at kicker over the past 4 seasons, but he is now gone on to greener pastures, which does leave a vacancy at kicker, a vacancy which has no clear indicators of who will be taking over in that role. Will Stone is the most tenured player at that position on this roster, so we'd assume he'd get the reins here, but I'm honestly not sure. The brighter side of this unit is Jack Bomeister, the Utah transfer punter, who statistically looked like one of the better punters in the country last year. But Texas was a bit pedestrian also on punt coverage last season. They allowed 17 punt returns and an average of over 7 yards per return, which is middle of the road, around 65th to 70th in the country. Still a lot of progress to be made there, but not the biggest deal in the world, especially if that offense can get it going. You won't need a punter as much. And with that, let's take a look at our grades for Texas, starting with the offense, which we are giving a 92 and A-. The offensive line is obviously the biggest question mark, which is pulling this grade down a good bit, but we think Arch Manning could be the best quarterback in the sport next year, and the running back and receiving rooms will support that claim. He's got a lot of talent to work with despite the inexperience on the O-line. And as for the defense, we are giving that unit a 97 flat, an A, and our highest rated defense so far this year. It's easily one of the best units in the country with the guys we talked about returning for them. We can't imagine they have that hard of a time replicating their success on that side of the ball in terms of how they did last year. But the same cannot be said for the special teams unit, which we are giving an 87.5. Not an elite unit, probably not even a great unit, but should be good enough next year. We'd like to see the punt coverage take a step forward, obviously, but if the offense is humming, there may not be that big of a need anyways. As for the coaching staff, something we haven't gotten to talk about a lot in this video, we're giving them a 98 and A+, the first A+ of this offseason in our season previews, because they have a truly cohesive bond on that staff. There hasn't been that much turnover since Sark took over in 2021. Pete Kwiatkowski and Kyle Flood both return as coordinators this year, and they've been getting better and better every year, it seems. And as for their strength of schedule, we're giving the Longhorns a 97 flat. Both of those away games against Ohio State and Georgia are hard to look at, but they will have an extra 3 games in September, followed by a bye week to really prepare for that conference schedule. And they go into that Georgia game off a bye as well. So Longhorn fans, gotta look on the bright side here with this one. It's not amazing, but there are some pluses to be afforded there. And that brings the Longhorns to an overall grade of 94.5 and A, and the highest grade of any team thus far for a team we think is probably the best overall in the country heading into 2025. Now let's take a look at Texas's floor for this season, which we think is a 9-3 finish. This would mean they lose their 2 biggest matchups on the road, with another loss to potentially Texas A&M, Florida, or Oklahoma. We don't think this will happen, but it's still in the realm of possibility for this team with an inexperienced quarterback and with a shaky offensive line. But I have Texas's ceiling this year at 11-1, meaning they go 1 for 2 in those big matchups, or what I personally think will happen, they win both of those games and then lose to a Florida or an Oklahoma in a shock upset. Which brings us to our final prediction We think the Longhorns hit their ceiling and go 11-1. We think they beat the Buckeyes this year. We think they beat the Georgia Bulldogs this year, and they end up losing to one of those two upset teams in Florida or Oklahoma. I like Ohio State a lot this year. Go check out our video on them. But that game being in week 1 to start the year, and Texas having probably the better defense in that matchup, is what we think gives them the edge there. We're not too confident in Georgia as a team this year, but they will still obviously be really good. We just like Texas having that bye week before to prepare, and we think they go out and beat Georgia on the road. And of the two teams we think they lose to, honestly, Oklahoma is the more likely of those in our opinion. It's a rivalry game. It's a neutral site game. A lot to be unexpected in those situations. 11-1 is our prediction. Leave your prediction for the Texas Longhorns in the comments below. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot, and we will see you in the next one.